Hello, welcome to session 3B, Improving Accessibility in Archival Spaces. This session has been sponsored by Atlas Systems. I'm Shay Rafferty and I'm a member of the MAC 2021 Program Committee. Before I turn over to the session presenters, I would like to go over a few logistical details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. The session also has the chat feature enabled, which you are free to make comments and share relevant information with your colleagues, but try to direct questions to the Q&A so they are not missed. I'd also like to share MAC's expectations for conduct during this session. By participating in the session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and the other session participants. Any type of harassment or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments, slurs or epithets, threats or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disruptive behavior, that person will be removed. Thank you for following these guidelines. Finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experience via social media. I'll be adding to the chat the suggested conference hashtags. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to our presenters.
Hi folks, I'm Lauren White and I will be sharing my slides here. One moment. There we are. So welcome to session 3B, Improving Accessibility in Archival Spaces. I will be leading off our presentation and then handing it over to my co-presenters who will introduce themselves as they begin speaking. Quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to cover the concept of universal design as kind of a framework for thinking about accessibility. And then we're going to cover some concrete tips for accessibility in physical spaces, the employment relationship, and then digital spaces. So as I mentioned, I'm Lauren White. I'm an archivist at the Gerald Ford Presidential Library. Quick little disclaimer from me that I am speaking to you as a professional archivist and not within my government hat role. A quick physical description of me: I am a white woman with shoulder length blonde hair, and I'm wearing a melon pink blouse. And I will kick us off talking about the concept of universal design. So there's a lot of different approaches to accessibility, and the one we chose to focus on was universal design because it kind of aims for accessibility in as broad a scope as possible. And what we're hoping to share with you guys today are some examples for how you can build accessibility into your everyday practice. And that way accessibility and disability issues become part of the archive and move more towards a space of inclusivity and not just diversity. So perhaps a little confusingly, but hopefully it'll be a point of clarification. So I want to talk about something that we're not talking about, which are accommodations. It's very closely related to what we're talking about. So accommodations are an incredibly important part of accessibility. According to the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act official definition, it's any change or adjustment to a job, work environment, or the way things are usually done that would allow an individual with a disability to apply for a job, perform job functions, or enjoy equal access to benefits available to other employees. What does that mean? It's things like someone like me who is very short getting a keyboard tray, so I can reach the keyboard on my computer, maybe a sign language interpreter, or flexible schedules, just a specific accommodation for a specific person's need. The drawback here is that it requires a disclosure of a disability or a need. It is at the individual level. The person with the disability needs to request that accommodation in whatever formal or informal way. So the impact is kind of localized of accommodations. They're really important, but they are on an individual level. So what we're going to be talking about instead is universal design or inclusive design. So defined by the US Department of Labor, it's a strategy for making products, environments, operational systems, and services welcoming and usable to the most diverse range of people possible. A couple of examples to explain what this means. So curb cuts and sidewalks, for example, they're designed to make sidewalks more usable for folks in wheelchairs, but they have a wide variety of uses for lots of people, people on bikes, people carrying heavy luggage, pushing babies in strollers, archivists taking carts of boxes across campus. There's a lot of usefulness beyond the original intention, so it has wide applicability. Just like captioning for videos, it's useful for folks who are hard of hearing or deaf, but it's also great for someone who's perhaps that's not their native language, or they're watching a recording, they're watching in public. Lots of different ways that captions are useful beyond the original purpose. So universal design in that way is more global, or at least at the organization level, in that it does not require the disclosure of a disability. It's built into the plan of when you're creating something, whether that's a service or part of a building. It's something that you're going to do to help visitors and guests. Quick example before I turn it over to my co-presenters. Quick personal example, at a past job, we were setting up stackable rows of stackable chairs for an event in our exhibit space. And we had our student employees set up the rows. And we didn't specifically tell them to leave the aisles large enough for wheelchairs. So we had a guest to come to the event in a wheelchair, and they had to ask for an accommodation so we could make space for their wheelchair. That was embarrassing. That was an oopsie on our part. If we had thought about accessibility before designing the chair layout and before giving the instructions to the students, we could have avoided that accommodation. It would have just been built into the event. So now I will turn things over to Veronica for more information on accessibility in physical spaces.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Dennison, and I'm the University Archivist at Kansas State University. My pronouns are she, her. And for a physical description, I am a white woman in my early 30s with long light brown hair. I'm wearing black rimmed glasses and a black shirt. I also would like to acknowledge that the state of Kansas is historically home to many Native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized Native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about universal design in both our reading room and in employee spaces. Well, many of us, including myself, work in spaces we had absolutely no control over, especially in their design. There are some things we can try to do to make our spaces more accessible for everyone. As archivists, we want our services to be welcoming and inclusive, but we should also want our space to be welcoming and inclusive. No place is perfect, and many of us will not have the opportunity to change things, but maybe we can change one thing at a time as we get funding or as equipment is made available to us. My presentation is to just give you ideas for your space and maybe something to strive for, and to not make you feel bad if this is something you cannot achieve or you cannot completely implement. My institution doesn't have a remote entry door to the reading room, so I totally understand the struggle. And you also might already know what I'm going to say or have implemented some of these things. And in that case, I guess this will just be like a little refresher for you. Next slide. All right. To help achieve the goals of universal design, it has been distilled down to 7 principles. As stated by the Center for Universal Design at North Carolina State University, these principles are equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information. Next slide. Tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. And it can be anything from designing this space to science and programming. But today I'm going to speak to you mostly about the physical spaces in both the reading room for users and spaces occupied by employees, such as their offices, and then a little bit about the technology. Next slide. All right, so the first thing most patrons see when they enter the reading room is typically the reference desk. Sometimes the reference desk itself can be intimidating to users, like those large fortress type desks I have seen in some archives. But to make it more inviting and accessible to everyone, having a reference desk in the reading room that's either low level or 2 levels where one part is higher than the other, this can easily accommodate those with varying heights, so you can interact with them as close to eye level as possible, whether sitting or standing. An accessible desk has a surface height of no more than 34 inches and no less than 28, and not deeper than 30 inches to facilitate the sliding or handing over of items. Service desks should be accessible to staff on the staff side, as well as patrons on the patron side of the desk, so there should be dual accessibility. At my current institution, we recently extended the reference desk so it has a more accessible low-level portion. It's not perfect, especially with the higher level portion that is definitely not deep enough for anybody to work on. But it's better than what it was in the past. And granted, some people might be stuck with the reference desk that is either low or too high, and you don't have the ready funding to redo the whole desk. Next slide. But this can be a relatively easy fix and maybe somewhat inexpensive. If building a new desk isn't an option for you, ask yourself if the reference interview or reference transaction, whatever you like to call it, has to happen at the reference desk. Universal design is all about fluidity. Is there a table around that you can sit at, or a table with an adjustable height for you to bring a laptop over in order to talk to the patron, and letting the patron choose where they want to be as well. This can make just people feel more comfortable instead of intimidated. And in regards to reference services in the reading room, offering a tablet or a computer for someone to register electronically is also beneficial. I think many of us probably offer desktops for users in the reading room to register, while some still go only the paper registration route. But making the switch to electronic registration while still offering paper can be more accommodating, not only for those with disabilities, but for also those who aren't so-called tech savvy or who just don't like using computers. I've had researchers who hate using a computer. So having a paper registration form is just easier for them. And then also offering users tablets and a desktop to use in the reading room while looking at collections and researching. So having both options. Some users might bring their own devices, but maybe they can't afford it, or maybe they forgot their own device. And so if they come in without their own device, having a desktop and a tablet for them to use can be helpful. Many iPads have accessibility features already built in, and using a tablet might be easier for some than using a desktop computer, keyboard, and mouse, and maybe they just prefer using a tablet. And in regards to comfort, allow for movable furniture and diverse seating. Not everyone can sit in every chair. I know personally that after sitting in the wooden stiff back chairs for a couple hours, my body aches and I have to stand up and move around. And studies have shown that extensive sitting in chairs can cause back pain, fatigue, varicose veins, poor circulation, problems with the diaphragm, digestion, and body development. Offering researchers and employees different seating options can be effective. Having an adjustable table where someone in the reading room can stand if they choose to do research, that way rather than sit for hours at a time. I've had many researchers who ended up standing after sitting for a while, but they still continue to look through the folders standing at the table that they were just sitting at. And while this does let them get up and stretch and move their legs a little bit, then they have to bend their head, their neck, and their shoulders, which can be just as uncomfortable. Different seating options and desk adjustments can benefit everyone, including offering employees standing desks and letting employees choose their office chair that works for them, because no two bodies are the same. Chairs should be height and ergonomically adjustable, and offer chairs without arms or wider chairs for those who do not fit comfortably into what is considered a standard width chair. Even if you can't replace all the chairs in the reading room on the patron side, just having one ergonomic and height adjusted chair would suffice, and it will give people options. Another crucial part of universal design is having zone temperature and humidity control. And I know this can be hard and something most of us probably have no control over. I have personally never worked at a place that has ever allowed me to control the temperature in my reading room or in my office. So just warn users ahead of time, maybe make it part of the initial phone or email conversation, and just let them know if the reading room is usually too cold or too hot, or maybe it depends on the day. Next slide. Right, so just some other ideas. Having lever door handles. These are easier for people with certain disabilities than the knobs. Having a fragrance-free environment in the offices, the employee spaces, and the reading room. Offering noise-canceling headphones for employees and patrons. Just having them readily be available. Reading rooms aren't always quiet, especially if there's a group coming in or students or multiple researchers. And these can easily benefit those with sensory disabilities or people who might get easily distracted, or somebody who just wants to work in silence. Along similar lines, offering a quiet room or a separate office space just for people to get away, especially if employees work in a very open setting and don't have access to their own office space with a door. This can help if an employee uses text to speech or speech to text software, or someone with sensory disabilities or an anxiety. At my former institution, we did all have our own offices, but they all had windows into the reading room. So prior to when I started there, they actually converted part of a supply room into a quiet room. This was a room that didn't have any windows. There was a chair in there, and there was a sign on the door, and like you could just sit in there for 20 minutes if you just wanted to get away and sit in quiet. And people in the rest of the library, other employees did come in and use that space. And it also doubled as a lactation room for our researchers, because at the time, the library did not have a easily accessible lactation room. Also offering ergonomic keyboards and mice for employees in the reading room. I love my ergonomic keyboard and mouse, and it's also Bluetooth enabled, so I can just carry it around. Trackball mice are another thing. Magnifying glasses. I assume most of us probably have magnifying glasses in the reading room, but just in case. Also, the access to dimmable lights. This is an expense because you have to change the electricity. But dimmable lights aren't just for people with sensory disabilities. I remember in one of my offices, they changed the lights and they were so bright. I couldn't work in there until facilities came back and they had to remove like a light panel because the new lights were just too bright for that space. So if I had a dimmable light, it would have been slightly better. And then signs, they should be in large print with high contrast between the letters and backgrounds and printed on non-glare surfaces. And also Braille should be included. And it's also crucial when it comes to accessible technology, especially in the reading room, to practice using screen readers on PCs and Macs and any type of accessible technology that you have. And then also make sure that carts, tables, chairs, electrical cords are completely out of the way so people can easily maneuver in the space so they don't knock into things. I know I don't typically watch where I walk, so I run into tables and chairs all the time. And if you have floor outlets, make sure they're all covered. I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally stepped in one because the cover broke off of it and somebody didn't put it back. And it was in a weird spot, so you couldn't really put a table over it. So just make sure that there are no obstacles in the way. And I know I didn't really talk about the stacks today, but having the smaller, lighter boxes on the top of the shelves and the heavier cubic footers on the bottom of the shelves not only benefits people who may have a physical disability, but also can help prevent injuries and can create easier pulling just for everybody because nobody should be pulling a 40-pound box off a shelf that's above their head. And adaptive and universal design isn't meant to substitute for standardized devices. And even with the best universal design, if that exists, there is no guarantee we can benefit everyone, and different accommodations might need to be made. But the more we have, the less employees and our researchers or our users will need to disclose. Disabled people and non-disabled people will always have a need, and both will benefit. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Zachary Tumlin. I'm an archivist, educator, and disability self-advocate. My pronouns are he, him, his. My image description is that I am a young 30s white male with short brown hair and a beard and black frame glasses, and I'm in my basement apartment. I'm speaking to you today about employment because when we think about disabled people in our archives, they are not just patrons, but they are also our employees, or they can be our employees. And before I move on, I also want to say that I'm located outside the Washington, D.C. area, and that is the historically unceded land of the Piscataway and the Nacotchtank. And so I'm the only one here that is not in the Midwest region. So I appreciate getting to participate in this. And also, unlike my other presenters today, I'm also the only one looking for work. So I will throw that out there, especially since I'm talking about employment. So next slide, please. To get us started here, I wanted to give us some context about the labor force characteristics in the US for last year. And these come from a Department of Labor report, which is released annually, and you can find a link to it at the bottom of this slide. So we're keeping in mind that these statistics are from the year that we spent mostly in the pandemic, but the trends have generally stayed pretty consistent. So if we start with the unemployment rate, the blue is for disabled people and the orange is for non-disabled people. But we can see disabled people have a higher unemployment rate. They have a lower working age employment to population ratio, and you can see that one is a pretty big gap. And for context, working age is 16 to 64. So a lot of disabled people are above that 64 age, but for the ones who aren't, you can see that big gap there. Moving on to management, professional, and related occupations, which may sound kind of awkward, but that is where our professions of being an archivist or a librarian would lay. And this is how the Department of Labor categorizes different professions. So our profession falls within this group. So that's why I use that kind of awkward language. But you can see non-disabled people are more likely to be in these professions, and there's a variety of reasons why. When we look at people who are employed part-time, we can see there are more disabled people who are either only able to find part-time work or who may only be pursuing part-time work, again, for a variety of reasons. And lastly, self-employed statistics. So we may think that it's good that more disabled people are maybe entrepreneurial. It can also be because they are not able to find work in larger institutions because of a lack of accommodations or an unwelcoming environment. And so they might feel like they have to branch out on their own to find success, which is unfortunate. Next slide, please. So moving on to something different here, we have the Getting to Equal the Disability Inclusion Advantage report from Accenture, which was a study from 2015 to 2018. And this looked at 45 disability inclusion champions from something called the Disability Equality Index, which is published by a group called Disability In, if you happen to have heard of them. But this report found that these disability inclusion champions were more likely to have higher revenue, net income, and economic profit margins, which may not matter to many of us who are in public institutions. But we also see that these companies had increased innovation, improved productivity, and better work environment, which should matter to us in the public sector. And then it also noted that if even just 1% more of disabled people were hired, it would boost our GDP and it would help the overall economy, which would help everyone. Next slide, please. So 4 actions that this report recommends are employ, enable, engage, and empower. And when we traditionally talk about employment of disabled people, we get stuck on this first action of employ. But we need to think about the others. So in the employ phase, we think of changing the traditional interview process and changing the environment. But as we move on in the enable phase, we talk about universal design and formal accommodations, which Lauren already spoke to you about. as well as Veronica when talking about changing physical spaces. And Lindy will speak next about digital spaces. Moving on to engagement, we start having employee resource groups, which do not seem as common in our public sector, but we do see them much more often in the private sector. And disability education or programming. So informing the rest of the company about disability culture, for example, and the things that are being done, like universal design, for example. And then lastly, moving on to empowerment. So this could be mentorship of disabled employees, but also getting them involved as mentors, as well as leading the employee resource group, for example, and advancing their careers. We don't just want to offer them entry-level jobs, and we don't want them to stay in entry-level jobs. We want them to be in all areas of the company. Next slide. So let's look at that first phase, recruitment and hiring. So these sections here are from an article that's linked at the bottom that our accessibility and disability section in SAA published last year. And we looked at 6 different areas: job posting, the applicant evaluation, the initial interview, the second interview, any dining portion of the interview process, and then the offer. And so I don't want to give away the article. I want you to give a click to Archival Outlook there. But for me, the one I would like to focus on with you right now at the moment is the initial interview, because that's something on my mind as I apply and look for work. And so we talk about things like offering the interview questions ahead of time without even the applicant having to ask, for example. And I've dealt with all kinds of different scenarios in this and different levels of honesty where people have said that they don't have the questions to give me ahead of time, to flat out refusal to give me questions at all without filing a formal accommodation request, which I just don't understand that anymore. Your questions are not state secrets. Chances are they aren't even that terribly different, but just this unwillingness to share the questions ahead of time is so unnecessary. And so when we talk about accommodations and altering things, sometimes I run into, it's not that you can't do it, it's that you're simply unwilling to do it. And so something like just offering, just giving the questions ahead of time. Like I said, I've dealt with all kinds of different things, and I had a really great interview experience recently where this head of the committee said, I don't have the questions for you right now, but I'm going to give them to you at least 2 days in advance. Here's everybody on the search committee that you'll be meeting. And I got the questions when he said, and the interview went really well, and it was something I appreciated so much. And it allowed me to give a better quality interview, which I think makes better use of everyone's time. Next slide, please. So moving on from recruitment and hiring, because like I mentioned, it's important we start thinking about how to retain and develop this talent. So this is something our section is working on right now. And in a couple months, hopefully we'll have another article for you to check into that'll delve deeper into this. We'll be looking at accommodations and disclosure, the workplace environment, as well as workplace protections, supervisors and evaluations, promotions and advancement, and lastly, connecting this to the larger issue of precarious employment in our field, which some of you in the Midwest region here are focusing on and have done great work on. And so I want to link this topic to that. But what I'd like to focus on today is from the supervisors and evaluations and promotions and advancement sections. So specifically the idea of your employees needing to fit your workplace culture, looking for these people who are a fit, as well as the ideas of the professionalism and collegiality, these words that are subjective and can be used to discriminate against people, not just disabled people. But I'm thinking recently, for those of you who maybe are especially plugged into Twitter, of the the posting at Vanderbilt University recently, and some of the problematic language in there that certainly set off red flags for us who are disabled archivists, for possibly being ableist, or there were things in there that could be used to discriminate against those of us, especially who are neurodivergent like me. A lot of you fixated on like the little black clouds thing. And just this idea of looking for people who fit our culture without examining our workplace culture first. Because there are non-toxic people who will not fit in your culture if it is toxic. And so examining your culture, and I think of looking for people who have red flags of being toxic personalities versus this idea of fitting into your culture. Next slide, please. Lastly, as an autistic self-advocate, I wanted to mention something called the Autism at Work Roundtable. And so this started off as a small group of mainly tech employers a few years ago who recognized how many autistic people were unemployed and recognized that they had needs that these people could possibly fulfill. And so they got together and they started to work together on sharing best practices and various things. And you can see that it has expanded to all of the people listed on the screen. And one that stands out to me as one of the best is DXC and their Dandelion program. And this is an Australian company, so you may have not heard of them, but they are one of the best. But something that has happened more recently is you've started to have employers broaden out from autism into neurodiversity, which includes autism as well as ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, Tourette's, all sorts of different disabilities. And one of the leaders doing this is Microsoft. So they were one of the first founders of the Autism at Work Roundtable, and they especially are broadening out into neurodiversity, which I'm glad to see, because we need to not just be thinking about autistic people, but about neurodiverse people in general. And so I'd like to leave you today with kind of a challenge of when will a cultural heritage institution join in. So you notice that list of employers, you've got mainly tech companies with a few other kind of random companies, like a car wash company, for example. And so as somebody who's been in the arts and humanities my whole life, I don't see anybody there that has a place to offer me. And I think about other disabled archivists or librarians and just other people like me, and how none of these companies have anything for us. So I'm waiting for somebody to step up and join this roundtable, like Smithsonian or an NYPL, or just anybody in the arts and humanities to start with, because I'm tech savvy, but I'm not interested in many of the jobs that these tech companies have to offer. And so I'm trying to make it in these other companies. And I just would really like to see a cultural heritage institution step up. So I'll leave you with that for today, though.
Hi, I am Lindy Smith. My pronouns are she, her, and I am head of Labuddy Special Collections at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I am a white woman with long, dark blonde hair and red frame glasses, wearing a dark red dress and sitting in front of a wall with art and vinyl recordings. I'm currently on the ancestral land of the Otoe, Missouri, the Osage, and the Kaw, Arkansas, land that has also been home to the Shawnee, Wyandot, Ochedee-Chakowin, Kickapoo, and others who were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, and continues to be home to Indigenous people of many sovereign nations. please consider supporting Indigenous organizations like the Native American Disability Law Center. Today, I'm going to be talking about accessibility in digital spaces, and I'm going to go quickly. Most of these slides could be their own standalone presentations, but my goal here today is to give you a brief overview of digital accessibility measures you can implement in your own work, focusing on productivity software like Microsoft Office, websites, and social media rather than accessibility measures that take more technical knowledge and expertise. Next slide. Online meetings and events. Make accessibility measures like captioning and sign language interpretation clear ahead of time so people don't have to ask for those accommodations, but do also provide participants an easy mechanism to request accommodations ahead of time. Provide captions. CART, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translations, or human-generated captions, are better than machine-generated captions, but machine-generated are better than nothing. Zoom currently offers automated live transcription, which you can use on this meeting right now for paid users, and has plans to add it for free users later this year. You might consider using CART, which can be expensive for major events, and machine-generated captions for regular meetings. Briefly explain the platform's relevant features, like how to enable captions, pin a specific video, for example, a sign language interpreter, or use keyboard shortcuts. Verbally describe content of slides and screen shares, or share documents ahead of time. Our slides are linked in the chat. The SAA Accessibility and Disability Section Steering Committee's Education Subcommittee, which is led by Veronica, has created accessibility guidelines for Zoom events that should be included on the section website soon. Brad Ferrier from the University of Iowa, who is in the audience today, is primarily responsible for these, with contributions from Zachary and other steering committee members. And we're demonstrating some of those best practices in our presentation today. Sorry, Kat. Next slide, please. Section 508 and Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Section 508 was added to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 in 1998 and is a federal law. It requires certain accessibility measures for electronic and information technology. Many states have their own laws around digital accessibility, so depending on where you work, you may have a legal obligation to make your online spaces accessible, though you should really do it anyway to make digital content accessible to everyone. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines were also first created in the late 1990s. We're currently on version 2.1 and version 3.0 is in the works. These provide detailed guidelines for all aspects of web accessibility and can be a good way to audit your current accessibility measures and identify areas for improvement. Next slide. Links. So use link text, not exposed URLs. Think of it like that nightmare where you're giving a presentation in your underwear. You want to have clothes on, and think of link text as clothes for your URLs. In this example, I've used the link text Merlin catalog rather than the long and messy URL for that website. One exception, you can use exposed URLs if they're very short, like a Linktree or Bitly address. Link text should describe the location content so it's identifiable. Essentially, tell people where the link will take them and let them know if clicking the link will initiate a file download. Link text should be unique within a page, so don't use the same link text over and over, especially if it's taking people to different places. And avoid link text like click here or read more. Next slide. Alt text. Alt text describes a still image or GIF. You can usually find it within image editing options on whatever platform you're using. Use it to describe the image content succinctly, ideally in 125 characters or less. Avoid beginning with unnecessary words like picture of or image of, just describe the content. Include text that appears in images. If the image is really text heavy, also convey that information another way, like in the main body text of a website. And I've included links on the slide with instructions for adding alt text to images on 4 different social media platforms. Next slide. Color and contrast. Avoid relying only on color to differentiate links or other text. Make sure colors have sufficient contrast with background colors or images. So as you can see, the black and white has sufficient contrast, yellow and white does not. And you can download a color picker extension for whatever browser you prefer to use. This will identify hex codes for different colors on websites, and then you can put those hex codes into WebAIM's contrast checker to make sure that you have sufficient contrast. It's a really handy tool. Next slide. Formatting. Use headings to indicate hierarchical structure like sections within a page. Make sure that you maintain correct order within your headings. So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, and don't skip levels. Headings can also be used to save you time in generating tables with content and applying styles to your documents. Capitalize within your hashtags and avoid all caps to make your content more readable. When you use tables, make sure that they are only to display tabular data, not to manage formatting or item placement, and include a header row in your table. Next slide. Fonts. Simple sans serif fonts are generally among the most accessible, and default fonts in programs tend to be accessible. So Google uses Arial as default, Apple uses San Francisco, and Microsoft uses Calibri, although they announced 2 weeks ago that they're, after 14 years of Calibri, they are moving to something else in the near future. So we'll see what that looks like. There are lots of other options you can use as well. I personally like Verdana, and it's what my slides are in today. Comic Sans may surprise you as a very accessible font, particularly for dyslexia. And there are additional specific fonts for people with dyslexia. So Dyslexie, which is proprietary, and Open Dyslexic, which is free. Next slide. Audio and video. Turn off media audio play, as it can be distracting and even trigger seizures. And most users honestly find it annoying. I know I do. For audio, include transcripts for spoken word content. For videos, avoid or provide warnings for flashing or strobing images. Again, it can be a seizure trigger. Include captions or subtitles. If you don't know how to do that, YouTube provides automatic captioning and a pretty user-friendly interface for editing those automatic captions. You can then export them for use on another platform, which is what I typically do when I need to generate captions. And I've also included a link to information about TikTok's auto captions. Next slide. PDFs and digitized content. So born digital documents like Word docs that are converted into PDFs will likely be more accessible without a lot of extra effort than documents that are scanned as PDFs. For scanned documents, use OCR or optical character recognition to create a searchable document, or provide a transcript if it's a handwritten document. You can also use tags to outline PDF structure and help guide screen readers, though you should know that OCR and tagging may require specialized software. Use metadata for digital collections to provide detailed descriptions and context that won't fit in brief alt text. Next slide. Language. So be respectful when describing accessibility and disability, and avoid ableism on your website, in descriptive metadata, and in social media posts. The National Center on Disability and Journalism's Disability Language Style Guide is a good general resource. You may also want to do more research on specific disability communities or individuals, depending on your local needs. And then be aware of person first language, like person with a disability, and identity first language, like disabled person. A lot of resources will tell you to always use person first language, but it's a really individual choice, and both are used regularly by people with disabilities. When possible, find out which an individual or community uses rather than making blanket statements or assumptions. Next slide. I have also put together a list of tools and resources that you can use to learn more. So the SAA Accessibility and Disability section, which we are all members of, has general and archive-specific resources on their website, including links to the blog and social media. WebAIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, is a nonprofit organization based at Utah State University's Center for Persons with Disabilities. It has lots of good information, training opportunities, and tools. Accessibility checkers can be helpful for identifying problems, but much like spell check, they will not catch everything and might try to catch things that aren't actually problems. Microsoft Office has built-in accessibility checker on the review tab in whatever program you're using from that suite. WebAIM, which I just mentioned, has a Wave web accessibility evaluation tool, which is free. And there are other browser plugins, platform-specific tools, or proprietary options that you can search for and find. So like I said, I've only scratched the surface with my brief presentation today, but hopefully the resources on this and other slides, which will be available after the conference, are a good place to dig deeper. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them either at the end of the presentation or via email. Thank you.
Hi friends, it's Lauren White again to give us an outro. So to try to wrap things up, we hope that we gave you a lot of useful information and some concrete examples today. And we acknowledge that universal design can seem daunting to implement, especially in physical spaces if you don't have control over them or the ability to renovate everything into your dream archive. But we hope that we still gave you some concrete changes that you can make in your thought processes, your language, workflows, virtual programs, and employee interactions that can make the step toward inclusivity and not just diversity. As I mentioned before, accommodations remain absolutely vital on the individual level, but by building accessibility into just your everyday workflows, it means that you will meet the needs of some folks with disabilities without putting the burden on them to disclose. And to wrap up in a final thought, the goal of archives is to preserve information for access. And I hope that we've given you some ideas for how you can help make your archive itself and its programs more accessible and inclusive, because accessibility shouldn't be an afterthought. And now we will take any questions.
It looks like Allison has a question. Allison, if you are ready, you can unmute.
Shay, you may want to read the question. I'm not certain that.
She has her hand up raised, which is why.
Oh, okay.
But otherwise we can move on to the written questions. Okay. All right, written questions. We have a question from Rachel. I'm curious if panelists have any thoughts or recommendations regarding in-person accommodation and/or universal design with COVID-related restrictions in place, i.e. face masks, plexiglass screen covers over reading room desks, physical distancing, etc.
I can answer this, but if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free. But with universal design and in-person accommodations during COVID and stuff, I'm not sure much would really have to change other than having social distancing. If you do want to social distance, having 2 monitors, especially if you talk to somebody and you want to show them like the computer. So instead of working at the same computer, have a mirrored or dual monitors. That can work. And, just cleaning is important, cleaning signs as well, especially if they're being used, if there's Braille. Yeah, I'm not sure how much would actually really need to change other than having, social distancing at the tables and limiting the amount of people in the reading room. So
I will just add that I think one issue with mask wearing is that people who rely on lip reading, that can be an issue for them, but there are masks either for purchase or patterns available. I'll drop one in the chat with a clear plastic window that I've sometimes used when providing public services.
And I think remote reference is even more important prior to the person visiting in person. So you can explain procedures, you can show videos, a video orientation or something like that, so that instructions are more clear and there's less that you need to cover in person, so that you can dedicate that in-person time to what's most important. So that kind of reduces the in-person exposure during COVID, but when you are with them, you can give them the service that they need.
And this is Zach, and I'll just wrap up this question. So I'm a graduate from the University of Maryland, and I still live pretty close to campus. And when you're thinking about questions like this, you don't always have to be thinking just within your library or your library system, but connecting with your larger university or institution. So, for example, about the clear face mask issue, I know that at Maryland, that's something that they are thinking about at the university level, providing them if you want to request them. And so it's not just an issue that they're leaving individual units to deal with, like the libraries, for example. And so issues like this that might impact your whole system or other places on campus, bringing those to people's attention who are higher up in the system can be helpful as well.
If anyone else has any questions, please submit them to the Q&A.
I see that we have somebody with their hand up.
Yeah. Gary, if you have a question and want to unmute, you can. Okay, we have another question. Can you talk about a time you've successfully advocated for universal design in your library or archive?
This is Lauren. I can give you a very budget-friendly, completely cheap, and $0 cost example. At a previous institution, we did a lot of tours in a library that was very tall. It had like 10 or so floors, and the archive was spread out over multiple floors, and there were multiple exhibit spaces. So the tour groups would lead through the reading room and different exhibit spaces, going up and down the stairs just by default. So I made the suggestion that for any tours or interviews, we default to the elevator. It is slower in a big building, but it is more accessible. For example, I have a knee injury due to a car wreck, so I can't always use the stairs, although it's not apparent by looking at me that I don't like stairs. So just suggesting that we use elevators, even if someone is not in a wheelchair, is something that you can do to be accessible for everyone. And that's zero cost.
This hasn't happened yet, but I still think I can claim I successfully advocated for it. So our reading room does not have an automatic door, but I requested one, and it's been put on the list of future projects. So that will be helpful for people who have difficulties opening doors, but it will also be super helpful for archivists with carts full of boxes. So universal design.
This is Zach, and I wanted to hop in here on this question after what Lauren said and the comment in the Q&A that I want to thank the anonymous person for. Some of what we're talking about is just a change in procedure or workflow, like the elevator rather than the stairs, for example. I think that's something we wrote about last year in the article that I mentioned when it comes to giving a campus tour during like a second interview, for example. And yeah, sometimes it's just a change in thinking, like with sharing the questions ahead of time. Maybe the first round interview, if it happens over Zoom, not using cameras, just to help keep things kind of more anonymous and less things that you could judge somebody on, and just various things like that can not cost anything, but just be a change in procedure.
We probably have time for another 1 or 2 questions if anyone has any last queries. One more minute on questions, but we've had some nice positive comments in the chat. All right. Seems like that could be it on questions. But thank you for a wonderful presentation, everyone.